So selling your collection part 2 with dealers. If you have not watched the first video, then I really encourage you to check it out. So what are dealers good for? Well, they're good for a few things. The ones we're going to take a look at are appraisals, consignment, and wholesale. So first, let's talk about appraisals. Most people are not going to want to pay for someone to come in and appraise their collection. It doesn't happen a lot because it's not cheap. I don't know very many dealers who are willing to go in and appraise a collection. I've heard of it happening a couple of times. If a dealer is going to be called in and appraise a collection, it's probably a fairly large collection, which means it's going to take a lot of time, and he's going to have to, from wherever he lives, he's going to have to probably drive and stay at that location for a couple of days. If you talk about you're going to have to pay for someone to travel, you're going to have to pay for them to stay somewhere, then you're going to have to pay them. It can get very expensive. If you think about it, at 8 hours a day times $15 an hour, you're talking about $120 a day. I don't know what rate any other dealer would charge to do appraisals, but I just don't think most dealers find it very appealing. Before we take a look at consignment and wholesale, I want to just briefly touch on how do dealers sell. Well, a dealer normally sells at the same venues you have an option to sell to. So they sell at shows or Trade-O-Rees. They also can sell on Facebook, and they usually run an eBay store. A dealer may also move items via private sale. Now, for our intents and purposes looking at things, most private sales, the dealer's still going to have to mail the item. So it's going to have the same cost as a sale on a Facebook group. So there's no reason for us to really go into private sales. So let's talk about consignment. How is consignment calculated? Now this is really important. There's two different ways. You either have percent taken from the gross or percent taken from the net. Different dealers do it different ways. If it's taken from the gross, most of the time when I've seen that happen, it includes any costs. So no matter what it sells for, they're going to take a percentage. You're going to get the rest. Any costs associated with the sale are going to be taken out of the dealer's percentage. Now, percent taken from the net means that when it's sold, any costs are taken out of the item, and then the dealer takes a percentage and you get the rest. Let's take a quick look over here at the examples. So you have a gross of $1,000, and we're going to say a cost of $300, about 30%. And then you have the consignment fee, which is 50% of the gross. I do know of several dealers who have done consignment around those levels, so that's a realistic number. So your net is going to be $500, and then the dealer is going to take $500. He's going to pay the $300 in cost, and he's going to get $200 net. Another example, when I first started off really kind of selling collections and doing stuff, I did this for some large collections that helped me get started. So here's an example of how I did it, which was $1,000 gross. Then you have the cost, so in this case, 30%, $300. And then you have the consignment, which is 20% of the net. So $700, then you take 20% of it, and the dealer is going to get $140, and the original owner of the items who consigned them is going to get $560. The problem with this, and I'm going to mention this probably a couple times because it's kind of a key point, is whether you can find a trustworthy dealer who is willing to take 20% of the net. I know that me personally, I found that at 20% of the net, when I first started off and I was kind of trying to get my foot in the door, I felt like it was worth doing. However, now I've found that at 20%, unless I'm only dealing in high-end items, it really does not cover my labor cost. Now let's talk a little bit about costs. So you have the percentage paid to the dealer. Now, what you're paying the dealer is essentially you're paying them to do all the labor for you. All the other costs that the dealer is going to encounter, whether they sell it at Trade-O-Rees or on Facebook or on eBay, or all those costs still end up having to be paid. Now, I think this is a very key point, is the timeline. It is very dependent on a collection. If there's 10 $100 items, and you want somebody to sell these items for you on consignment, maybe at a large national show or something else, that's going to be very different from you handing someone a collection of 1,000 miscellaneous unsorted items and asking them to take them on consignment. Both situations happen. If it's a large collection though, you need to be prepared when you do consignment that it could take months or years to move items. Here's a bit of a dealer's cost review table. You can see that we're still kind of going off example 1 and example 2 from the original video. The cost at shows is going to be 10 to 20% or more. On Facebook, you have the shipping cost, so 6.33%, 12.2%. I did all the calculations for that in the previous video. And then on eBay, you've got the final value fee, which is 11.5%. Now on to the items, you can kind of see that the range, and this is a fairly optimistic range because there are some fees that we'll touch on later that are not covered in some of these percentages very well. Like it shows, I talked about how you may end up paying more than 20% depending on the cost because they're so variable. But you've got a range of between around 80 to 90%. We'll call it 85%. So dealers are going to usually be doing about 85 cents on the dollar, 85%. So now after consignment, come down here, and at 50% of the gross, you're getting 50%. You're locked in. That's the amount you're getting. So if you can find someone who's willing to take it on a percentage of the net, it does create some variance. You may end up with anywhere between 60 to almost 75%. I will say you'll notice that at 20% of the net, the dealers end up with less than 20%. So once again, I think that it would be very hard to find a reputable dealer who would take it at that price, because if you get into that, unless you're only dealing with better quality items, you're probably not making enough money to cover your cost of labor in that deal. Now here's wholesale. So I think wholesale has a little bit of a bad rap. Everybody thinks that dealers are all in it to make money for themselves, and obviously it would be better to sell it yourself rather than sell it to a dealer. I don't think that's the case. It really depends person to person and collection to collection, but I'm just going to try to lay it all out for you, and then you guys just pick what you think is the best option. So you have to remember, with any sort of investment, anytime you buy a collectible, something like that, and you're thinking you're going to resell it, there's a risk and reward situation. As a dealer, if I hand you money for your collectibles, you now have money in your hand. You can go to a store, you can buy whatever you want to buy. I have patches that I now have to resell. If I can't sell them for as much as I expected I could, or if I can't sell them for as much as I paid you, then that's a risk I have to be willing to take when I buy the items. So there's always a risk and reward relationship, and I would always caution people, if you are buying items thinking you're going to resell them, be very careful and do your homework. Don't jump into it, because that's a way to lose a lot of money very quickly. A dealer is also going to look at how much labor is involved. This kind of comes down to the quality of the items and whether or not they're identified. A lot of times they're not identified at all, and if they're labeled very clearly. So I know that I will always pay more for higher quality items because it's a lot less labor to list those items. I would much rather take the time and list $100 items than 1,000 $10 items. We're talking about days difference in the amount of time I'm spending listing those items, and time is money. So of course I'm going to pay more for better items. Now, at the same time, are items correctly identified or labeled? If I don't have to take a day of my time to go through a blue book or OA images or whatever reference you want to use and identify items, I'm going to pay more. You're saving me time. Now, I will caveat that, kind of underlining correctly identified. I have bought collections before, and there were many items that were misidentified. And if I notice that when I'm looking at a collection and I'm going through and I'm going, wait a second, some of these are not identified right, that casts suspicion on all of them, and so I have to re-identify everything. The other thing is quantity. So if you have a collection, sometimes somebody will end up, maybe they went to Conclave and someone told them, you need to buy, a brick of flaps. You'll be able to trade them at the next NOAC. Oh, NOAC got canceled, and they ended up with 50 flaps they never did anything with, and 10 years later they sell their collection. Well, guess what? No one's going to pay as much for something if you have 50 or 100 or 1,000, whatever quantity it is, of all the same type of item. And amazingly, with how many and how much has been produced in the last, I'd say 15 years, it is getting to a point where you go to buy collections and sometimes you'll come across a group of 50 of the same council strip or something like that. Well, usually in the Boy Scout hobby, if you sell one of an item, usually does well. And then if you sell one or two more, you usually do okay. But after maybe 4 or 5, it can get very hard to find another collector to buy the item. And you may be stuck with a vast majority of a quantity of items that you then have to essentially go out and trade those at a conclave or a national jamboree or something for anything else to be able to sell that item to get your money back. So quantity does have a large impact on what people are willing to pay for something. I want to talk a little bit about margin of safety. So we were looking at that table earlier and I said that, the optimal return would be around 85%. Now that doesn't include if somebody has eBay store fees they pay. I know I pay $60 a month. It used to be over $300, but eBay redid think that I was able to drop my store level to $60, which was a real blessing. But then you also have things like Ink Frog. I think I pay $120 or maybe it's $160. It's a yearly fee, and that's a listing software. So dealers do have additional fees that they'd pay because they make life a lot easier, but that they're paying on top of some of those other fees we talked about in the previous video. 85% is maybe an optimal return, but there's no margin of safety there. And that means that if I don't get 85, if I get any amount under that, I've lost money. So I think most people, when they buy anything, they like to have a little bit of margin of safety. If I don't get top dollar exactly, maybe I'll still at least be able to break even. Or I personally like around a 10% margin of safety. And I think that that's probably pretty accurate to what dealers actually get. I think that on average, I get around 70 to 75% on the dollar as my take home after fees and everything, not including taxes. The last point on here is timeline. Most dealers for small, medium size, even some largish collections are going to just go ahead and pay you that day. They're just going to go ahead, write you a check, be done with it. Now, if you get into very expensive collections, then a dealer may want to negotiate some sort of payment plan with you. I've always found those to be very successful. Being able to split very large collections up over a couple months does give dealers a little bit of wiggle room, and usually they're willing to pay a little bit more if they can have a little bit of financial flexibility with a payment plan. Now here's a quick example. So you have 200 items. These are all retail $5 items. I'm using air quotes for that retail number. You have one workday to scan and crop the images. You have one workday to draft the images. I think this is fairly accurate. If it's neckerchief slides or any other 3D item or maybe insignia that's a little harder to identify or something like that, it may take even longer, but 16 hours, $15 an hour, $240 in labor, that's 24%. Now we're assuming we're going to sell all 200 of these items for $5 each. We're going to get that full retail value for each one of them. And so that gives us $1,000 gross, 85% optimal return. We're getting around $850. We're taking off that labor cost. So we're getting at a no margin of safety, but hopefully we're getting around $610 or 61% return. Now this return is going to be over months or years. This just kind of shows you if a dealer is expecting that over several months or years, they're going to get 60%, 61%, and that gives them no margin of safety. They're obviously going to pay you less than that amount. Now let's look at another example. So this is $1,000 item. That's maybe 10 minutes of labor to scan the item and list it, $2.50. Roughly. So you take your $1,000 gross, 85% optimal return, and then you minus your labor cost, you end up with about an 84.75% return. Now, you don't sell $1,000 items every day, so this may take a long period of time to sell that one item. That being said, it's a lot less labor, a lot higher return, and this is why dealers are willing to pay a lot more money for quality items. So how much do dealers pay? Let's look at the numbers a little bit more, try to simplify it. After labor, you're going to probably have expected returns between 60 to 85%. If you include a 10% margin of safety, you're talking about 50 to 75% returns. Remember, every year that you take to get these returns, there's an opportunity cost of about 8%, where instead of buying all these patches, maybe you put your money in S&P 500 ETF. and maybe you got that return of around 6 to 8% a year. I think is pretty standard. You need to keep that in mind because dealers are going to pay less if they think it's going to take them years to sell something versus if they think they can immediately turn around and sell it. So I think that most dealers overall tend to pay between 20 to 50% on an entire collection value. Now, I'm not saying that a dealer pays you $200 to $500 for a $1,000 flat. That's just not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if you have a $1,000 collection, maybe you have $100 flat, and then all the rest are $5, $10, or $15 items, they're going to probably pay you between 20 to 50% of the entire collection value. I also want to mention that dealers are collectors too. I think sometimes, especially at shows, people think, oh, he's a dealer. He made me an offer on this item. He's certainly not going to be the one paying me the most amount of money for it. I need to wait for a true collector. Well, in reality, a lot of dealers are big collectors as well, and oftentimes are willing to pay top dollar for whatever patches they need, usually because whatever they need is pretty hard. So I just want you to keep in mind that dealers are collectors too. We all enjoy collecting patches. So don't just necessarily discount a dealer's offer on the thought of, well, he's buying it to make money. If he's buying it for his collection, he's probably offering you a very good price. And I'll also mention that occasionally, it doesn't happen a whole lot because it's got to be a special item, but sometimes dealers do sit there and buy a whole collection to pull out one item for their collection and then sell the rest, just break even and be done with it. I've done that a couple times where there were some really rare camp items that I really wanted for my collection, and I was willing to buy the whole collection, pull out the handful of items I needed, and sell the rest, basically just trying to break even, because I would rather buy the whole collection and make sure I get the piece I really need than miss out on that piece, even if it takes me a little bit of time to recoup the rest of my money. So here's a nice little summary. So the shows, Facebook, and eBay is taken from the previous video. You can see that it ranges anywhere from 16% to 75%. Now you can look at consignment and wholesale, and you see that consignment ranges between 50% to 75%. Wholesale ranges from 20% to 50%. And then you can look down at the time. And I think this is very key here, is the time highlights that the longer you take to sell your collection, the more labor you're willing to do, the more you're going to get paid. Same thing as if you're willing to renovate your house entirely by yourself, guess what? It's going to cost you a whole lot less money if you're willing to do the labor than if you pay someone to do it all for you. Shows, you're talking about one weekend, probably a couple weekends, just because it's very rare for someone to sell every item at a decent price at a show on one weekend and be done. It happens, but it's usually for pretty cheap if they do. And then you have Facebook, which I would say is probably more weeks to months. You can probably move the items, even though you're getting a little bit lower return than if you go the long route with eBay, which months to years. Consignment, a lot of consignment is going to end up on eBay. It may end up somewhat at Facebook. Shows, a lot of people don't do a whole lot of consignment at shows because it's harder to track all the sales in person versus on Facebook or eBay. So once again, consignment, months to years. And then you have wholesale, which is usually one day. It's basically someone comes in, they evaluate the collection, and then they come up with a number. You talk with them. If you agree on the number, they pay you, and it's usually done right then. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you can, please like and remember to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out and helps push the YouTube algorithm to promote the video to other people who may be interested in the content.